Chapter 14, Act 14, Porum's Tale. Act 14, Porum's Tale, The Restless Heart. Mysidia, one day after the moon's return. Porum. I guess you've arrived in Troia by now. And here I am, stuck in Mysidia all by myself.
Are you there, Porum?
Porum raised her head in surprise, opening her eyes. Standing in the threshold, his hand slightly trembling against the door, was the elder. She wondered if he had been the one she had heard walking in the hall. Even though he had been doing much better when she saw him over breakfast that morning, she was shocked to see him actually up and about. Ever since the day he had collapsed nearly a month ago, he had been barely able to utter his directives to Porum each day without gasping for breath, let alone stroll down the hallways of the tower.
How are you feeling, elder?
Porum asked, quickly rising from her chair. He smiled, taking a few careful steps further inside her bedroom.
Oh, no worries. I feel fine today. That's wonderful.
Porum trailed off, her eyes drifting toward the open window. She suspected that he wasn't being entirely truthful. She had a feeling part of his recovery had to do with how concerned he was about the return of the second moon. She had gotten the report from his nurse that when the elder had met with Theodore, he had seemed fearful for the boy, urging him back to Cecil's side. He had somehow known Baron was in imminent danger, even without having been made aware of the horde of monsters Theodore had witnessed bearing toward his homeland. Physically, he was ailing, but his intuition had remained as sharp as ever.
What bothers you, my child?
The elder asked gently, and Porum shook her head, finally giving the pale white curtains framing her window an aggressive tug to block the view. There was nothing for her out there except the looming specter of the second moon. It infuriated and terrified her for the same reason. She felt totally powerless.
Nothing,
she lied, and was surprised at how easily the deception rolled off her tongue. Maybe she wasn't as different from Porum as she liked to think she was. The elder followed her gaze to the now covered window, tilting his head.
You wanted to travel to Troia instead of Porum, am I right?
Porum pressed her lips together.
I don't know anymore.
If she had been chosen to go to Troia, would it have really changed anything that had happened in the past few weeks? If she had gone in Palam's place, what would he have done for Mysidia while the elder wasted away? It made her develop an ulcer just thinking about it, and had been one of her only comforts about him leaving instead of her. The elder tried again, sensing that he was getting closer to the heart of her concerns. Even though Porum had always been an open, honest child, he knew that it took some prying for her to reveal her true feelings. When she felt the most vulnerable, he knew she hated exposing that part of herself to anyone, let alone him.
Are you worried about Porum?
Porum raised her eyebrows.
Well.
The elder clapped his hands over her own, and her eyes widened. They felt so small and brittle, like a pair of cowering baby birds. She wondered when the tables had turned and when her strength had started dwarfing his.
You want to go off on your own, do you not? Just like Porum. Elder.
Porum bit her lip. What is the meaning of all this? She supposed they really hadn't talked since he had fallen ill, but she thought she had done a fairly good job of keeping herself inconspicuous and hadn't wanted to hinder the elder's recovery with her devastation at Porum being picked over her. She told herself it was just a bruised ego, and all that really mattered was that he get well again, so that he would be his old self for when Porum came home. Maybe then they could try to go back to normal. Perhaps in his absence, Porum would realize that they could be how they were before if they both made the effort.
I realize I never entirely answered your question, my dear, and you've been on my mind much as of late. You still want to know why I sent Porum instead of you?
It was simply a statement, and not a question. He already knew what her response would be, after all.
I suppose I do,
Porum half whispered.
I acknowledge Porum is a rare talent. There's little denying that between the two of us,
Porum nodded. Yes, that was certainly not news. She had spent her whole life bearing witness to his greatness, after all. And it wasn't exactly a secret between the two of them. The whole of Mysidia was enthralled by Palam's powers as equally as they hated his salty attitude. To say he was a polarizing figure in their little village was the understatement of the century.
Well, be that as it may, that is not why I sent him to Troia. In respect to magical talent, there is nothing he can offer the Epop trainee that you could not. Black or white magic, it truly matters not in the end. It's spiritual fortitude that ultimately determines if an Epopt is successful in her post or not. Such is the price of any of us who serve the crystals. But what Porum is? Well, he is still young. You two are the same age biologically, but spiritually, you are light years beyond him in maturity. That's why I sent him on this business. There is much for Palom to learn through teaching others, and I felt that this particular opportunity was the right one for him.
Porum squeezed his hands gently, looking down at her feet. She desperately wanted to know what exactly it was about this particular request that made the elder recognize that this was best for Palom, but she didn't have the audacity to ask him to elaborate. She wasn't sure why, but hearing the explanation after all this time almost made her feel worse. While Palom was gallivanting about and improving himself, she was left in Mysidia to rot and stagnate.
I see.
The elder shook his head.
You're worried, aren't you? Worried that Palom will leave you behind someday.
Porum felt her eyes begin to sting, and she turned away, dropping his hands and pressing her fingers to her lips.
Perhaps.
He is well on his way, is he not? He began to pull away from me long before that first terrible fight. That was just the catalyst that finally pushed us onto our separate paths. She reached up, unconsciously twirling a lock of pink hair around her finger. The elder watched as she retreated into herself, shaking his head. So, that was it.
You two have been together your entire lives. As siblings, as friends, and as rivals. But more importantly, when you look at each other, you see yourselves, your victories, your failures, your strengths, and your weaknesses. Is it any wonder you two are drawn together at times but just as thoroughly repelled during others? It's a pattern often found in nature, not just among humans.
Porum nodded slowly. A hand had lifted the veil of darkness, letting a single beam of realization shine forth.
Yes. You are right. When I see Palom, I see a man who wishes to achieve his dreams, no matter the cost. His confidence is intoxicating, but his arrogance repulsive. I see what I hate. But what also seems to elude me.
She shivered, a sad smile forming.
I guess you would call that jealousy. He's known from such a young age what he wants, and well, I really know nothing, hey. I'm sure you will find your own path to walk sooner or later, Porum.
The elder reached up, grasping her shoulder. Now, his grip felt warm and capable, just like when he would comfort her as a child.
The best thing to do now is to think about what that path might be. And do you know what is miraculous about paths?
Porum tilted her head.
What? Once blazed, they never truly fade away, whether others follow to further deepen them, or a path surrenders to the annals of time, your soul will always be impressed upon it in a way that even nature cannot expunge. So, if a path is not correct now, one can always follow it back home again, and retread later, if the time becomes right. With each morning you greet, you are a slightly more evolved version of your previous self, everything about you, down to the most molecular level, has changed since the night before. Is it any wonder that you do not quite know which direction to take yet in your short time on this planet?
Porum nodded, feeling her cheeks flush in relief. Maybe she wasn't as bad off as she originally feared? And when the elder put it that way, it meant that perhaps her tumultuous relationship with Palom could still change as well, right? Whatever it was that kept them repelling, they could eventually evolve past and adapt to together.
Yes, Elder.
She smiled gratefully, turning to throw her arms around him. He smiled back, stroking her hair and kissing her forehead, just like she always imagined like a mother or father would do when their child came home crying and hurt. She had never known if her own parents ever did that, all of her memories of them had long faded into oblivion.
There is no need to rush yourself. And when you feel ready, I promise that Palom will be there to support you. Yours is a bond that is unbreakable, even if it is under some duress right now. You've been good to him, even if neither of you realize it. Love at times manifests itself in ways we do not expect, and we can mistake it for something else.
Porum nodded, pulling away. She wasn't quite sure if she had really been as good of a sister as she could have been, but she had been trying to redeem herself for stomping all over his dreams. The elder was not one to flatter anyone with insincerities, so perhaps she did owe herself a little credit for her efforts. He took a lingering look over her room, drinking in the piles of books that seemed to take up every free inch of floor space, her unmade bed, a rare, troubling sight, the baskets of laundry that had been long neglected, and scratched out, crumpled to-do lists that had overflowed from the wastebasket.
You've done much for the tower in my absence, Porum. I'd like you to take in a change of scenery for a bit, it may do you some good. Perhaps a walk in the village is in order.
Porum flushed, suddenly embarrassed by the state of her harried existence being exposed.
I do have some other chores I should complete yet today, Elder.
She had let herself get distracted by Theodore's appearance in her nostalgic wallowing, and she didn't want the elder to think he needed to start taking up his duties again so soon. 1/2 day of relative wellness did not mean all of his strength had returned.
Don't worry about it,
the elder said, shaking his head as he began to walk away.
They are all things that can wait. Get some fresh air and come back with a clear mind and unburdened heart. We'll have much to discuss as it is with our new visitor.
He glanced toward the window again, and Porum nodded soberly. Palom. Hurry home. This is something we should be facing together. Isn't it? When Porum returned to the Tower of Prayer, she ran into the elder's nurse, who had been sweeping the hallway. In the classroom, Porum could hear a bevy of children reciting spells in order of progressing strength, and the croaking of one obnoxious toad. Either one of the children had let their pet loose, or one of them had become the victim of a typical early-level black magic prank.
Fire. Fira. Firaga. Blizzard, Blizzara, Blizzaga. Ribbit. Do you know where the elder is?
Porum asked over the children's chanting. She had been out for much longer than she had anticipated. Once she had physically left the Tower of Prayer and started wandering around, she found that she was not too anxious to return. It had been nice to get a taste of the early summer weather, and lots of friendly faces were anxious to say hello and ask her how she was holding up with Palom being gone so long. Just fine, thank you very much.
Resting upstairs, the nurse smiled. He did ask that he not be disturbed for the time being. Understood,
Porum nodded.
I'll be in my room if you need anything.
As Porum entered the hallway behind the crystal chamber that led to her and Palem's rooms, she paused in front of Palem's closed door across from her own, her heart pounding. She could count on one hand the number of times she had been inside since that fateful afternoon when he had attacked her. Just standing where she was made her scalp tingle. And even though this had been the longest they had ever been separated, she couldn't help but feel like he could see her even now, peering over her shoulder with that irritating smirk and daring her to disobey him. She gently pushed the door open, cringing at the creaking sound it made as it swung inward. Much like her room, it was covered in clothes, books, and various instruments, rods, empty potion bottles, and enough accessories meant to enhance magic power that would make a queen's wardrobe envious, but she knew that his room was always like that, whereas hers had only gone into recent decay. His bed was exactly as he had left it, the sheets thrown back and spilled on the floor and the pillows tossed aside. Someone had been inside at some point to at least air it out. The window was wide open, with white sheer panels that matched her own fluttering in the breeze. Palom. Porum took a few steps inside, pressing her lips together as his familiar scent drifted around her, soap and the last remaining notes of an obnoxious, citrus-based cologne he started soaking himself in when he was a teenager. Closing her eyes, she pressed her fingers to her chest, focusing only on the flow of her blood as it pushed in and out of her heart, picturing the flowing red as it rushed through the canals of her body. Moments later, she could just barely detect it, a second heartbeat reverberating with her own, bumping along in the same rhythm, foggy, shadowy hallucinations dancing behind her closed lids. Flickering lights shined on ivory walls, footsteps echoed in a hallowed hall, tumbling waves fell down a receding figure's back. A strange warmth began to spread in her chest, and she could feel her pulse flutter. He's safe. I wonder what he's up to.
Lady Porum. There you are.
The illusion shattered, and Porum plummeted back into herself. Her eyes snapping open, she whirled around and was surprised to see the elder's nurse, her brows knitted.
Didn't you hear? The elder is calling for you.
Porum. The voice was coming from above, which could only mean the elder had enclosed himself in the prayer dais. Even unwell, he continues to pray for the planet. Porum frowned as she pushed past the nurse and began to sprint up the spiraling stairs. He shouldn't push himself. Porum burst into the uppermost spire of the Tower of Prayer, pausing in the doorway to catch her breath from racing up the entire tower of stairs in one lengthy dash. Although she was pleasantly surprised to see the elder still vertical, he didn't look at all drained or hunched with exhaustion. She was more so surprised to see Anja and Megan return from Baron, each standing a few feet behind him and exchanging troubled looks. When had they snuck in?
Welcome home, you two. What is it, elder?
The elder shook his head, gesturing for Porum to join him in at the full-length window he was gazing through. Porum peered outside the window facing south, raising her hand to shield her eyes from the glaring sun. At first she thought the elder had been watching the twin moons, the new arrival seemingly larger than it was yesterday, but his chin was tilted down, his palms pressed against the glass.
Elder. The dragon. It's crying,
the elder rasped, his voice weakened. Porum frowned, redirecting her gaze toward the shoreline instead. Even from their distance high in the tower, she could see the white waves of the ocean churning with agitation, swirls of water crashing into each other in the early beginnings of a vortex.
What?
Porum gasped, smashing her face against the glass. The vortex gradually began to widen, and there was a tremendous crash that ripped through the sky. It sounded like thunder, but the skies were still crystal clear. Megan and Anja hesitantly approached Porum from behind to get a better look, gazing over her shoulders just in time to see a massive black and glowing red curved vessel emerge from the water, steadily rising in the air and casting a dark, twisting shadow upon the churning seas.
The lunar whale.
Porum whispered. She had only seen the legendary Lunarian ship once before, when Cecil and the others had arrived home from the moon, triumphant over Zemus. It was not only the vessel that was the subject of the Mysidian legend, but it had also been built by Cecil's father, Cluya, the Lunarian who had brought magic, airships and the Devil's Road to the Blue Planet, and whose soul was entombed on Mount Ordeals. When Cecil and the others had disembarked the ship, it had promptly retreated back into the Mysidian Sea, its purpose in securing Cluya's legacy now complete and the moon to whence it had once traveled having left their planet's orbit. Birthed from the womb of a dragon's maw, and born unto the stars, by the light and darkness cast aloft, our dream-tide oaths rest sworn. A chorus of cries rang out from the four mages as the lunar whale's rear rockets suddenly burst to life, propelling the ship past the upper spire of the tower and disappearing into the atmosphere before any of them could blink.
Where is it going?
Porum gulped, and the elder shook his head sadly. Below, the seas had begun to calm once more, but clusters of villagers had rushed to the shore, and Porum could hear their cries of dismay carry on the wind. The elder cleared his throat, his trembling voice gaining strength as he gazed upon the crystal floating above them.
I have called all of you here to discuss a dire matter. As you have all witnessed, the lunar whale has risen, setting off in the direction of the new moon.
Porum, Megan, Anja, and the elder were secured in the Crystal of Water's chamber, both the entry and exit doors locked shut to barricade any villagers or tower residents from wandering in. Megan and Anja had caught Porum up with the briefing they had given the elder upon their return, and what they had to share had left Porum even more shaken than witnessing the lunar whale's sudden ascension to the heavens. Barren Castle appears to be abandoned with nary a soul to be found inside, yet hypnotized soldiers that do not recognize Theodore guard it with their lives. The villagers are clueless that anything is amiss, speaking only of a monster attack that they claim King Cecil saved them from. The Prince of Barren had a breakdown and under duress revealed his identity to the hooded man. Poor Theodore, I was right, he was hiding his true self from that stranger. What is he going to do now that he has been found out? Where is Cecil, Rosa, and Sid if not in the castle? What's happening over there? The elder looked away from the crystal, his eyes falling upon Porum's. She couldn't help but shiver when she saw how void of light they had become, even bathed in the crystal's aura.
With Porum absent, I would like to call upon the powers of the dragoon.
Porum's jaw hit the floor as Megan and Anja glanced at each other.
The dragoon.
It had been a tall tale for many years that a solitary dragoon had been living east as a scavenger, although no one had seemingly ever gotten a good look at him or spoken to him. It being well known that the dragoons were originally the guardians of the royal family in Barren before evolving into the nation's on-ground military, the conspiracy theory that was most popular was that he was a deserter from Barren, and some went as far to name him as Cain Highwind, the former leader of the dragoons, and King Cecil's best friend who had gone missing after the war.
You mean the one rumored to be Cain Highwind?
Porum blinked, and the elder nodded.
The one and only. If the rumors are to be believed, we can find him on Mount Ordeals. He will be able to help us get to the bottom of what has happened in Barren.
Porum shook her head as Megan and Anja muttered behind her.
But what? But if that's really Cain, it would mean that Cain has severed all ties with Barren, and by association, us, if your ultimate objective is to ally with Barren to investigate what is going on with the moon.
Anja cleared her throat.
Elder. This is certainly a serious matter that requires swift response. But surely, my city's army of mages would be sufficient for its protection.
Megan protested.
Why do we need to call upon an outsider, one that may not even exist or be willing to ally with us? Oh.
The elder shook his head.
Perhaps you are too young to remember, there was once a time where I felt the same as you. But if those dreadful events of the past were to visit us again, we Mysidians would sacrifice much to gain little.
Megan pouted, looking away. Out of the corner of her eye, she thought she saw a shadow dash behind one of the crystalline pillars, but upon looking closer, she saw it was just a gross toad that must have escaped from one of the classrooms. No way I'm touching that thing, someone else will have to find their missing pet later. Porum bit her lip. She could understand where the elder was coming from, he was trying to save them from another massacre like the one Cecil had unleashed 17 years ago. Surely Megan and Anja had to realize that more powerful mages than they had been no match for the onslaught that awful day. Even now, Mysidia had not entirely recovered from the loss of those souls. Porum shook her head.
Black magic is not a panacea for all our problems. Have you forgotten what the elder taught us? Spiritual fortitude is foremost what we must be concerned about, saving lives instead of dreaming up plots to take them. If the dragoon really is Kane Highwind, he may know what is going on with the lunar whale or the moon, being that he has dealt with both in the past. And it would be safer for all of us if he could be our envoy to Baron, as well.
The elder watched Porum quietly, his mouth pressed in a straight line. Anja rolled her eyes. Being a black mage, Porum was sure Anja did not like any portion of what had just come out of her mouth.
Yeah, but how else should we respond to the moon's return?
Megan shrieked.
If Porum were here, we would not be discussing such a ridiculous plan. We are practically gifting our lives to a phantom who could be friend, enemy, or non-existent. Elder.
Porum gently tugged his sleeve. Still, he did not look at her, his eyes were boring into Megan's. Megan huffed and crossed her arms over her chest, looking away. Porum sighed. The elder's plan required them to take a leap of faith, but she truly agreed that it was the best way to avoid the spilling of Mysidian blood. Yes, perhaps if Porum were around, the conversation would have gone differently. With her brother, they might have stood a chance if a battle were to break out. But we can't depend on Porum for everything, not Mysidia, not the elder, and not myself, Porum thought dejectedly. If we really believe in the values that the elder has tried to instill in us with our training, then now is the time to take action for ourselves and put those values to the ultimate test.
I will travel to Mount Ordeals at once,
Porum volunteered, and the elder gasped, shaken from his daze.
But don't worry, I won't do anything rash.
The elder's eyes fell upon Porum's. She met his stare head-on, straightening her spine and crossing her arms over her chest as if to dare him to name someone better to go in her place. After a few moments, he let out a shaky breath and shook his head.
Be careful out there. Whatever you do, remember to stay out of harm's way. Mount Ordeals accepted you once, even I am not sure what will happen now, our world is in a terrible flux. Yes, Elder. Listen, everyone. We cannot afford to hurry ourselves into an ill-advised plan of action. If there is no aid to be found at Mount Ordeals, we will come up with another plan, together. Yes, Elder,
Porum, Megan and Anja said in unison, gazing at each other warily. It already seemed to be an impossible ask.
But in the meantime, I want you two to go with Porum,
the elder ordered, and Megan and Anja, to their credit, merely nodded, although the disappointment was evident on both their faces.
Yes, Elder. Prepare yourselves for the journey tonight, and make your leave tomorrow. It would also do you well to pray to the crystal for your safe passage. I, of course, will be praying as well. Yes, Elder.
Porum faced the two mages, a small smile on her lips as the elder turned, unlocking the rear exit of the crystal chamber and beginning his slow climb back up the tower steps to ensconce himself in the prayer dais. When his footsteps had finally faded away, Porum drew a deep breath.
We'll be fine, the light of Mount Ordeals will understand why we have come and we will not be turned away. I trust you, Lady Porum,
Anja frowned.
It's the elder I worry about, not us. You were right to remind us of our duty. I guess. With the three of us gone, who is going to ensure he doesn't do anything rash?
Megan sniffled.
He's likely to build a ship and fly to the moon his damn self at this point. He seriously wonders where Porum gets his stubbornness, he just needs to look in a mirror.
She blew her bangs out of her face and grimaced.
Do you really think the Dragoon will help us investigate what happened in Baron? If he's there, that is. If it's Kane Highwind, I have zero doubt,
Porum said softly. She thought back to the elder's words from earlier that day, love at times manifests itself in ways we do not expect, and we can mistake it for something else. Cecil had loved Kane with all of his heart. Even when Kane had been brainwashed by Golbez, Cecil harbored hope that they would reconcile once more, and they had gone on to save the world together. Porum had always imagined that the mote of light in Cecil's heart that had never given into the darkness and had blossomed on Mount Ordeals had belonged to his friends. He and Kane had been brothers in all but name. If Kane knew that Cecil was in danger, he would surely come back home. An unbreakable bond. The next day, despite the butterflies that had seemingly hatched in her stomach overnight, Porum made her way through the morning at a leisurely pace, double and triple checking that they had procured enough supplies to make the climb on Mount Ordeals and eating her breakfast slowly and methodically alone in her bedroom. When she finished eating, she rose from her desk to make her bed, taking care to tuck the corners of her bedding extra tightly and smoothing it over and over again with her palms until they had begun to ache from the friction of her cotton sheets. Slinging her backpack over her shoulder with her mithril rod secured to it and taking one last look around the room, her eyes fell upon the drawer of her desk that had the silver-embossed skeleton key sticking out. With Pollum gone, she had no concerns about anyone else in the tower rifling through her belongings, but what if he came home while she was away? Chewing on her lower lip, she twisted the key until the lock snapped open, and tugged open the drawer. She dug until she found what it was she was looking for, the second star ring that had been tossed away by its owner all those years ago. Slipping it over her pinky finger so that it stacked on top of hers, she slammed the drawer shut, locked it, and slid the key on top of her bookshelf, which was so high that she had to stand on her tiptoes just to reach it. When she stood back and gazed up, she saw it was completely hidden from view, at least for anyone else her height, like Pollum. The elder had not yet risen by the time she, Anja and Megan were prepared to depart. She guiltily assumed that he had been up all night praying for them in the dais, and decided to not bother him. It would be best if she got her mission over with as quickly as possible so that he could rest easy again. She could hear her two companions talking from the tower entryway as she crossed through the crystal chamber, taking one last glance at the crystal of water as her sandals clicked with purpose over the glass tiles. For a moment, when her reflection flashed back at her from within the crystal, she swore she saw Palem's face, and felt the ring on her finger pulse with heat. Never in my life did I think I would return to a place like Mount Ordeals without you by my side. All I can do is take what I have left of you, and pray that the mountain accepts me once more. I will not have you, Cecil or Master Tella to guarantee my passage this time.
The toad got out again. Who is the irresponsible knave that keeps setting it loose in the tower? I'm going to have nightmares about waking up with that thing on my face.
Megan's shrieks carried through to the crystal chamber, causing Porum to blink out of her melancholy reverie.
Don't worry, I caught it and put it back outside,
Anja said soothingly.
It's probably wild. Someone would have noticed if their toad was missing after all this time. It's disgusting.
A toad is not going to compare to anything you see on Mount Ordeals, Porum thought dryly. Oh, how different her journey to the Holy Mountain would be this time around.
I feel like it's already getting dark.
Porum frowned as they arrived at the base of Mount Ordeals, the three of them becoming draped in shadow as she spoke. Ahead of them, the grey, twisted mountain rose to the heavens and faded behind a blanket of dreary mist. A clear line of demarcation stood between the mountain's jurisdiction and the overgrown path they had taken to get there, the abundant greenery and evidence of life, bothersome insects, paw prints from beasts and the birdsong of the forest suddenly disappeared once one set foot on the gravel path that would guide them northward. What had started off as a cloudy and windy late morning had become a near lightless trek as they had made their way east across the Mysidian continent. Careful to stick to the winding dirt road through the woods that was little used but ultimately led one to Mount Ordeals if you remained on it when it forked north, Porum was happy to see that they had managed to avoid the wreckage of the Red Wings. She wasn't sure if she could have handled the aftermath, seeing Theodore's face when he described it had been far enough for her.
I wonder if the storm we encountered in Baron is making its way here.
Anja shook her head.
That would just be our luck. Then we best hurry,
said Porum as she eyed a blackened, rotting husk of a tree a few feet away from them that had begun to violently twist in a gust of chilling wind.
The undead that plague the mountain will slow us down enough as it is. They seemed endless when I was here last. I'm sure it hasn't gotten any better in 17 years. How can one man have possibly survived out here all this time?
Megan shivered.
He would have to be scarier than the zombies at this point.
Porum looked down. She had never formally met Kane, but she hoped Megan wasn't right. Surely a friend of Cecil's would not be dangerous. If the elder had believed that, he wouldn't have sent them. Right?
So what are we looking for, exactly?
Anja blinked.
Other than a dragoon, obviously. We will make our way to the summit of the mountain,
Porum directed.
There is a shrine there that the dragoon may be taking shelter in. Keep your eyes peeled for any sign of life, and be on your guard. Anja, you take care of any skeletons or zombies with your fire magic. Megan and I will exorcise any spirits with cure magic. Got it? Yes, Lady Porum.
In all this time, nothing has changed. It's almost as if time has stopped. They were resting in the same campsite which Porum had shared with her brother and Cecil when they had run into Tella. If the dragoon had ever set foot there, you wouldn't have been able to tell. The petrified, spiraling trees and decomposing brush that contained a disturbing number of bones, both human and monster, from what Porum could tell, still surrounded the ledge. Large slabs of broken stone were scattered about that must have fallen from the cliffs above, and any remnants of a fire had long since been blown away, if there had been one, since the last time she had graced the mountainside. Has anyone really been in that shrine since? Porum wondered, her eyes traveling northwest where she could see the outline of the ivory monument that was only a short climb above them now. Surely, Cluya's spirit is at rest as well, now that his sons are at peace? There would be no other reason for him to remain on the blue planet after Cecil inherited his light.
Lady Porum!
Megan exclaimed. She had emerged from a tunnel where she had been fending off a clan of spirits and souls, fire-imbued monsters that would latch onto a dying man's spiritual energy and use the corpse as an incubator until the monster could develop its own corporeal form. Porum glanced over her shoulder as Megan approached, and Anja opened one eye from where she had been laying on the ground at Porum's feet, grunting at her nap being interrupted.
There is no end to these abominations, and no sign of the dragoon. We've nearly reached the summit, how long must we keep up this farce? I just want to investigate the shrine,
Porum said calmly, trying to understand Megan's frustrations. She reached into her backpack, pulling out one of their last ethers and handing it to her.
We would be remiss if we did not check for evidence there. No one can possibly be taking shelter in that shrine,
Anja yawned, popping her other eye open now.
I saw it as we were climbing up, it's just a stone monument. A grown man couldn't even hide behind it. I have my reasons,
Porum frowned, thinking about how she could possibly replicate the process for entering the shrine like Cecil had when he had fought his dark doppelganger.
Please. I know I have asked much of you these past 2 days. If you want to stay here, I'll go up myself. I won't breathe a word to the elder.
Megan pouted.
Geez. You know just what to say to manipulate us. Obviously, we're not going to let you go alone.
Porum ignored that comment. She thought perhaps manipulate was a bit too strong a word, and stood up, brushing off the gravel that had been imprinted into her knees. Anja rolled over and climbed to her feet, sliding her straw hat that she had been using as a pillow off her shoulders and back onto her head. A gust of sticky wind blew through the crossing, causing the wooden footbridge above them to sway and rattle warningly.
Rain will be upon us soon,
Anja frowned.
The air is thick with it now. My fire magic is going to be a lot less effective if we have to deal with that too.
The three mages made their way to the bridge, where they each crossed one at a time, circumspect that it may not hold all of their weight simultaneously. Porum, the last to cross, bit her lip and forced herself forward one step at a time, her mind flashing back to the surprise attack one of Golbez's 4 elemental archfiends had launched in a final attempt to stop Cecil from becoming a paladin. It had been there that she and Porum had cast their first twin cast spell together, defeating Scarmeglione and saving themselves and Sage Tella from certain doom. She remembered how intoxicating it had felt as the powerful black magic surged through her veins. Through their bond, her brother had been able to gift her with something she would never be able to replicate on her own. She had long accepted as part of her studies that she just wasn't cut out for black magic. She lacked the intense concentration and the will needed to manipulate what ultimately were spells meant to bring devastation. She had thought perhaps Porum felt the same way about the effects of white magic, and received a mutual benefit when he would twin cast with her, but then he had suddenly declared his intention to become a sage. If he learned both white and black magic as was par for the course for such a title, he wouldn't need her magic anymore. As Porum stepped away from the bridge, her arms wrapped around herself, a flash of light suddenly ripped through the now dark gray sky, surging through a lone petrified tree that burst into flame.
What was that?
Anja gasped, and Porum noticed that the crystals that were embedded in the ground around the shrine had started to glow a pale blue. Approaching the shrine, she pressed her palms into the cold slab of marble and closed her eyes, trying to pick up on any energy that might have been coursing within. Something had created that light, and it had been the same light that had cloaked Cecil when he became a paladin, as brilliant and delicate as moonlight reflected off a midnight darkened sea.
I don't feel anything,
she whispered. She opened her eyes, gazing upon the faded inscription in the stone that she had been unable to read 17 years ago, and was as expected, was even more so illegible today, now almost completely obliterated by the elements and the passage of time. Cluya, your son may be in danger, and it looks like the rumors were wrong about anyone being on Mount Ordeals to help us. What am I supposed to do? Another flash of light burst forth, blinding Porum and forcing her to retreat as she ground her fists into her eyes.
Ah.
She heard Anja and Megan's cries fade into the background, and suddenly felt as if she'd been plunged underwater. She could no longer sense solid ground beneath her feet, and her limbs felt like they were drifting and bobbing independent of her control. A wistful but bereaved voice breathed in her ear, and she felt heart clench even though she could not understand the words. I can hear something. It's fading fast, like it could disappear at any moment. It's a voice. One I feel I've known before. Porum's feet tapped against smooth, cold glass, and she felt her arms gently fall to her sides. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in the same mirrored chamber where Cecil had become a paladin, the walls except for one encrusted with glowing crystals that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. But the mirror that had once made up northernmost wall and had housed Cecil's dark reflection was nothing but a swirling void of darkness. Something powerful had destroyed it, and shattered pieces of glass and crystal were everywhere, glittering in the pale light and casting rainbow prisms upon the floor and ceiling.
What?
Porum gasped. There came a shuffling sound behind her as Megan approached cautiously, the glass crunching under her boots so loudly in the pure silence that it sent chills down Porum's spine. Behind her, Anja was staring at a wall of crystal, gently trailing her hand over the budding stems that pulsed with light beneath her fingertips.
Where are we? What a mess.
Porum whimpered.
Something terrible happened here. It's not at all like it was before. Wait. Could this be the place where King Cecil of Baron became a paladin?
Megan blinked. Anja lowered her hand, shaking her head.
And the place where Sage Tella learned the forbidden meteor magic, as well. Oh gentle white mage. AHHH.
Porum, Megan, and Anja screamed at once, making a dash to grab onto each other. Porum clutched the two girls' robes, her eyes darting about the chamber. Was the voice coming from the void of darkness? It sounded so far away. She could feel someone's fingernails digging into her arm painfully as the voice called out to them once more.
Please do not fear. For I am about to fade. But my spirit will never be extinguished. My sons have always believed in you. And now. That voice.
Megan whimpered.
It's talking to you, Porum. It's Cecil's father.
Porum whispered, releasing Megan and Anja and turning to gaze into the darkness.
And father to all we who study magic.
She shook her head, running toward the void and calling out.
Cluya. Please, Cecil needs your help.
But nothing happened, and no reply came. Porum let out a frustrated cry and cupped her hands around her mouth.
Cluya. Tell me what to do.
A sickening rush of air plunged into Porum's lungs, and when she opened her eyes, she found herself outside the shrine, once again on the summit of Mount Ordeals. Behind her, Megan and Anja were doubled over, clinging to each other and gasping for breath. And straight ahead, spilling forth from the bridge like a deluge of water in the crack of a dam, was a mind-dizzying horde of zombies, revenants, and wraiths, all of which had their dead sockets trained on the three women. One of the pack leaders shuddered violently and projectile vomited a mess of green and yellow bile toward Megan and Anja, which Porum managed to block just in time with a protect spell. The vomit bounced off the barrier and splashed to the ground, steam rising into the air as it began to eat away at the rock underneath, creating a blackened pit.
Ugh, so gross.
Megan wailed, and Porum backed up closer to them, holding out her arms. A crack of lightning pierced the skies, followed by the deafening rumble of thunder that made the entire mountain shake underneath their feet.
Cover me!
Porum cried.
I'm going to wipe them out with holy.
Anja withdrew her rod, thrusting it into the air as she chanted a fierce spell. Ribbons of flames wove through the crowds of undead, catching their tattered clothing and rotting flesh on fire as the smell of smoke and festering decay began to rise on the wind. Porum closed her eyes and folded her hands together, trying to block out the chaos swirling around her so she could concentrate exclusively on the spell. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, she couldn't seem to manifest in her mind exactly what she needed, a powerful beam of light striking from the heavens, laying waste to all before them and bathing the mountain in divine energy. Instead, her mind spun dizzily and deviated rapidly between images that she didn't understand. One moment, she was gazing down at the sea from the heavens, fiery debris raining upon her from above, and the next she was running through the darkened tunnels of a cavern, her lungs about to burst from the effort. Porum could feel her muscles convulsing as she grabbed hold of her head, digging her fingers into her temples. Why can't I cast the spell, and what are these visions? Why is my body showing these to me? A spray of water smacked her in the face, and when she opened her eyes, she saw that the storm clouds had burst open, instantly drenching them in rippling waves of rain as the wind tore across the summit. The monsters that had not fallen to Anja's magic were miraculously blessed by the forthcoming storm that drowned their flaming appendages and allowed them to continue shuffling forward, their numbers swelling and forcing the three of them to fall back. Anja cursed and lowered her rod, clenching her jaw.
Damn! Forget about holy, start assaulting them with cure magic. Look at all of them. We're hopelessly outnumbered.
Porum whimpered, shaking her head. Another flash of lightning illuminated the darkness, and for a second, Porum swore she saw a shadow fall from the sky, plummeting into the middle of the monster horde. A few moments later, the sound of rope snapping could be heard, and the bridge, now loaded with the undead, collapsed in on itself and plunged into the murk below. The shadow returned to the air, and the flash of steel blinded Porum as a lance plunged into one of the zombies from behind, causing it to crumble into dust before the weapon could even be withdrawn from the corpse. She heard a grunt, and a fist came flying forth, knocking another zombie's head clean off its shoulders with one punch. As the shadow turned to thrust its lance into another beast, a flash of blonde hair fluttered in the wind from beneath a helmet shaped like a dragon's head.
Who the hell is that?
Anja gasped, and Porum shook her head in disbelief. Oh my gods! My prayers have been answered.
It's Cain. What?
Megan blinked.
How do you know? I just do.
Porum cried, a blush crawling up her cheeks.
The way he moves, it's just like Cecil, the same Baronian stance. And who else could fight as gracefully in the air as the leader of the dragoons himself?
It was only minutes later that the horde was decimated, and with the bridge taken out by their savior, no more could approach. The zombies that were left behind on the other side stared listlessly, not quite sure what to do with themselves anymore, and either stumbled off the cliff in confusion or shuffled back from whence they came. Porum climbed to her feet and ran to Cain, who was standing with his back to her, holding his lance out to the rain to wash away the blood. Megan and Anja stayed behind, weapons cocked in case they needed to intervene in the negotiations about to take place.
Cain!
Porum shouted over the rain. He turned to face her, tilting his head. Beads of water slid down the snout of his helmet, which obscured the top half of his pale, ethereal face. Porum couldn't help but notice the delicate curve of his lips, stained the color of nightshade. She didn't know where to hold her gaze, since his eyes were hidden behind the glare of two unblinking, yellow cat's eye stones set upon his helmet. A ponytail of drowned blonde hair hung over his shoulder, nearly reaching his waist, and the scales of his dragon armor gleamed when lightning exploded in the distance, granting him the divine aura of the king of the seas himself, Leviathan.
Have I seen you before?
He asked. His voice was deep, but wearied. It could have been soothing if it didn't have just the slightest note of acerbity at the end of each clipped, carefully enunciated word. Even in the howling storm, she could hear the subtle register of an aristocratic accent. She supposed it was possible Cain had come from a noble family if he was leader of the dragoons, but she had never really thought about it until now. Porum shook her head, her bangs stubbornly plastered to her head from the rain. She was sure she looked as awful as she felt. She had still not entirely recovered from her odd spell of behavior from when she had been attempting to cast holy. Now she felt dizzy and anxious, although she had no idea why. Maybe she should have felt afraid of Cain, but for some reason, she simply did not.
I am Porum, White Mage of Mysidia.
Kane raised his eyebrow, not that she could see underneath his helmet, and his lip tugged up slightly into a smirk.
A white mage. I suppose you don't remember me. My twin brother and I saw you from the Tower of Prayer when you came home from the moon after the war, but you wouldn't have seen us. You never came back inside, if I recall. At any rate, I came here to find you, by order of our elder. Do you remember him?
Kane paused in thought. Once, long ago, Cecil had traveled with twins from Mysidia. It might have been on this very mountain. Whoever Cecil had been with, Kane had only been able to watch from afar, and his memories from those dark days under Golbez's control had nearly vanished from his mind. Sometimes they were so faded, he only saw shadows and garbled voices. But he did remember the elder of Mysidia. He had never had a good feeling about the old man, but it wasn't like they had ever come to blows, and it was apparent he cared for Cecil deeply, even after Cecil had stolen their crystal and led the slaughter of many of Mysidia's citizens during the war. It was funny how things always worked out for Cecil.
To find me? What for? Well, to discuss the return of the second moon, for starters. The Elder fears that it is a premonition of something terrible to come. A powerful group of monsters has already struck down the Red Wings. I see.
Porum lowered her head. Why was he being so blasé about all this? Perhaps he just wasn't putting the puzzle pieces together? She stared at her mudded sandals, trying to remain calm. If she kept looking at his disinterested mouth, she might scream.
At this rate, Baron could be in danger soon as well.
Kane sheathed his lance over his back in one fluid motion, crossing his arms over his chest.
But tell me, what reason do I have to help you? What?
Porum gasped. Megan and Anja gave each other a knowing look that neither Porum or Kane noticed. Kane shrugged, as if it were so obvious and that Porum was the dunce.
Baron ceased to be a part of my life a very long time ago.
Porum shook her head, her voice starting to shake.
That can't be true.
She gazed up at him once more, her cheeks flushed with anger.
Pardon?
Kane smirked, but his face quickly fell as he saw Porum's eyes begin to spill over with tears. Instead of hiding in embarrassment, she swept her rain-soaked hair away from her face and glared at him with even more intense scrutiny, closing the space between them so that her chest nearly pressed to his. Her matted ponytail hung down her back pathetically, her pink and white cape clinging to her form as a gust of wind crashed over them.
You're lying. You're lying to me and to yourself.
Kane gingerly reached for her shoulder, his fingers curling back at the last second as if her snowy flesh would burn to the touch. Porum's vehement cries had transported him back in time. He was back on the lunar whale, watching another white mage who would have been her age berate himself. Cecil and Edge, as she was being informed her journey to the moon was about to be cut short.
I'm not going anywhere. Without me along, who will heal you when you're hurt?
Porum shivered from the wind as she wrapped her arms around herself, not noticing Kane's hesitation.
Am I wrong? No.
Kane looked away toward the churning seas in the horizon that were as black as ink, holding his arm to his side as he smiled slowly, like something wonderful only he could see was being dangled tantalizingly before him.
Your eyes, just now? They remind me so much of the Queen of Barons. There's an exquisite light within when there is something you want. It's quite frightening to behold. Has anyone ever told you that before?
Porum blinked, feeling as if the world around her was spinning out of orbit. She could barely keep herself standing, her legs felt as if they gradually petrifying. Desperate and terrified, she took hold of his face, forcing him to look at her.
Then, please.
Kane gazed down upon her, cringing at the stinging sensation a ring on her pinky finger was imprinting upon his skin. It wasn't exactly how he had pictured his homecoming, but he supposed this was fate's way of moving things along. The moon had been the first sign, and perhaps this little stranger was the second. And if Porum was right about Baron being in danger, it meant that everything he had been working toward all these long years might be taken away from him for good, and well, he simply couldn't have that. This time, Rosa. I'll prove my worthiness. I didn't understand before, but everything is clear to me now. It feels as if I have awoken from a long nightmare.
Let's go. Baron awaits.
Porum smiled in relief, a tear sliding down her cheek. I did it, Elder. Now both Mysidia and Baron will be saved. Promptly dropping her hand from his face, her eyes closed as her legs gave out from beneath her.
Are you awake now? Lady Porum.
Porum moaned and pressed her cheek against something warm and firm. The scent of lavender mixed with rain roused her consciousness as she slowly opened her eyes, her fingers instinctively flexing and digging into what felt like metal-plated latex.
Hey.
Porum blinked, her vision focusing. She was staring at a sinewy neck covered by a curtain of corn silk hair, and realized for the first time since waking up that her feet weren't touching the ground, her thighs were wrapped around a slender waist and were being held in place by a firm grip, Kane's. She had been draped over his shoulders like a knapsack, her arms dangling down his chest. When she lifted her head, she saw that they were more than halfway down Mount Ordeals, and that the rain had ceased. The sky was still dark and the light of the twin moons was hidden behind a thick wall of clouds. Marching along on each side were Megan and Anja, who were staring at her concernedly.
I think I can walk now.
Porum flushed, and Kane stopped, bending down silently so she could climb off his back. She held her arms out for balance as she slowly rose to her full height, her heart pounding.
What happened? You had a horrible fever.
Megan frowned.
Every spell I tried did absolutely nothing. Kane took us over the crossing since the bridge went out,
Anja added.
We hid away in a tunnel until the rain let up. You haven't moved an inch the entire time, it was like you were comatose. I'm sorry.
Porum shook her head.
I really have no idea what happened. I feel totally fine. It's not like I was in the rain that long. You don't have to apologize,
Kane frowned.
But we should keep moving. Of course,
Porum nodded.
Thank you. For everything.
Kane waved his hand dismissively and kept walking forward, Megan, Anja and Porum scrambling after him. One of his long strides counted for two of theirs. When they reached the last sloping path that would take them off the mountain, Porum stumbled over a rock, her head spinning as she tried to right herself before falling. It felt like everything was moving in slow motion, even her voice seemed delayed from the time she parted her lips to cry out.
Ugh.
A sharp pain ripped through her abdomen to her chest, her heart feeling like it was about to explode. It was as if someone had taken an ice-tinged knife, plunged it deep inside, and had then yanked up to thoroughly gut her. Anja and Megan gasped, breaking away from Kane as Porum started to sway dangerously on her feet. She let out a pathetic wail, her eyes sliding shut as she fell to her knees, clenching her stomach. Oh God! It hurts.
What?
Kane whirled around, stunned into a stupor at the scene before him. Porum could only whimper as a burning sensation abruptly overtook her right hand. She slowly raised her palm and was shocked to find that the two-star rings adorning her pinky finger had turned a hot white, as if they had been tossed into a fire. A fleeting vision danced before her eyes, long, braided hair, a crooked smirk, and sad, searching brown eyes that mirrored her own in every way, down to the flecks of blue in their irises. When she blinked, the specter went away, along with all of the pain that had suddenly ravaged her body. She felt like the wind had been knocked out of her, but otherwise, she was back to normal.
Porum.
Porum lifted her head at the sound of her name, astounded to feel tears pouring down her cheeks. That feeling just now. Something terrible has happened.
Porum.
She whimpered. She pressed her fingers to her chest, but could only feel one fluttering pulse vibrating within, her own.
We need to go.
Kane walked up to her, extending his hand.
Do you need me to carry you again? Back off.
Anja snapped.
Can't you see something is wrong?
Porum was staring ahead with lightless eyes, urging her body and mind to cooperate as it had while she was in Palem's room, but nothing came to her. It was like picking up dead air on a radio, the connection was severed. I know I heard his voice. Porum blinked. Porum, what happened to you? My body. Has it been reacting to something you were experiencing in Troya?
Lady Porum.
Megan begged, shaking Porum's shoulder gently.
Please, what's wrong?
Porum bit her lip, forcing herself to her feet. The agony had vanished, the dizziness lifted, it was as if she had cast a cloak of lead from her body, and now felt light enough to fly.
Nothing. I feel fine. It won't happen again.
She marched past Kane's outstretched hand, jaw clenched as she started to jog down the remainder of the mountain path, her breath escaping in choppy gasps. Porum. I simply won't accept that you have left me, you're bluffing again, you bastard. The screams could be heard from the road that had been carved into the Mysidian prairieland even before they had reached the village gates. Porum broke into a cold sweat at the putrid stench of monsters rolling on the wind. It was so overwhelming that it nearly knocked her out. Directly above the Tower of Prayer, an electric blue lightning bolt struck, and the sound of shattering glass echoed on the horizon. The four of them broke into a run, Porum screaming as she stumbled through the mangled gates that normally stood tall and proud at the entrance of the village. The streets were teeming with monsters of all breeds. Nagas, goblins, ogres and chimeras were dueling with black mages as white mages tended to the injured, many of which were bleeding out openly in the streets or already too far gone and were pulled into flower beds or doorsteps to peacefully pass.
What? No.
Porum cried. She turned to face Cain, who was staring at the bloodshed wordlessly, his mouth agape.
Cain.
He shook his head slowly, not looking back at her.
We're too late. We have to find the Elder, quickly.
Porum reached for her mithril rod, gazing up toward the Tower of Prayer with its now shattered crystal dome still raining down rubble from the lightning strike.
I'll see how I can help out here,
Cain offered.
I'll clear a path for you, just run as fast as you can. Not going to argue with you,
Anja grunted, grabbing Megan's hand.
Don't fall behind.
Megan sniffled as she looked around.
I should have been here. Maybe I could have.
But Porum didn't stick around to hear her finish. She had bolted down the main drag, trailing after Cain, his crimson sash rippling from his helmet, the only banner Porum could possibly keep her eyes on to not lose him as he would leap into the air, impale an unsuspecting monster, and land for only a few moments before winding up to do it again on the opposite side of the street. When they reached the Tower of Prayer, Porum bust inside with Anja and Megan, and they heard Cain's lance smash into a Naga's skull as the heavy doors slammed shut, plunging them into silence. The Elder's nurse was collapsed on the stairway ahead of them that led to the crystal chamber. Porum ran up to her, kneeling down and grabbing her wrist to check for a pulse.
Are you okay?
Porum blinked, and the nurse moaned, her eyes not opening as she slumped against Porum's arms.
Mysidia. The crystal. They must be saved. Monsters. Hordes of them. From the Devil's Road. I fought to keep them out, but one got past me.
Megan and Anja gasped, turning toward each other. Porum looked down, her hand shaking as she cast Cura on the nurse.
The seal's been broken.
Megan frowned.
How else would they have gotten in here? I don't know,
Porum whimpered, standing up.
But she said a monster got past her. We have to find the Elder, before it's too late.
They burst into the crystal chamber, where the crystal of water was still safely holding its post, shining with its usual brilliance as if the world wasn't burning down around it. That only left the tower spire itself. Porum dashed into her room to make sure the Elder had not taken quarter there, while Anja checked Palem's room and Megan checked the remainder of the bedchambers. The three came together once more, and Porum led them up the stairs, the adrenaline pumping through her veins, the only thing that was still keeping her standing.
Elder!
Porum cried.
Elder!
She burst through the doors to the prayer dais, another scream escaping her throat as she took in the carnage. The chamber floor was covered in shattered glass and crystal, strangely reminiscent of the shrine on Mount Ordeals, and groans of thunder echoed above as another lightning strike raced across the sky. The Elder was collapsed within a glowing yellow dome. He or someone else must have managed to cast a protect spell as the ceiling collapsed. Fluttering above the Elder, screeching and trying to slice his claws through the barrier, was an enormous red eyeball with jade bat wings and a mouth full of grating teeth. When Porum and the others stumbled into the room, it immediately turned its blinking, watery eye upon her, and let out a whistling shriek that made her press her hands to her ears.
Look out for that blood eye!
Anja cried, but before Porum could raise her staff, Cain crashed through from the ceiling above, his lance positioned between his folded hands as he plunged the blade into the beast, a fountain of blood and pus erupting like a volcano as he ran his lance through, pinning the blood eye to the floor. A sickening slurping noise rang out as Cain removed the lance, the blood eye bursting into dust as the Elder's barrier faded to nothingness. Porum ran to the Elder's side, sliding down to her knees and gently turning him over. He gazed up at her with clouded, unfocused eyes, his voice rattling in his throat as he reached up to take her hand.
Porum! You've returned safely. Elder!
Porum whimpered, squeezing his hand back tightly.
Are you okay? The monsters! They appeared from the Devil's Road.
Porum lowered her head. Oh gods, then what the nurse spoke of was true.
Then Baron's already been overrun, and now they've come for us. I fear. it is already too late.
The elder shook his head, his hand going slack in hers as he fell back against the stone floor, wheezing for breath.
No, it can't be.
Porum bit her lip. See a door? Did you make it out of Baron alive? What about your parents?
Where is Cain?
The elder whispered. Porum blinked, gesturing for Cain to kneel down next to her. He did so, using his lance for leverage as he peered over the fading old man.
Right here,
Porum said gently, taking the elder's hand and placing it over Cain's knee. The elder opened his eyes once more, and Cain leaned in closer to hear him.
We stand below the twin moons once more. As we speak, your homeland of Baron has fallen into the hands of monsters. And next, Mysidia. They're after the crystals.
Cain said bluntly, and the elder nodded.
Who could be sending them here?
Porum frowned.
They're probably the same people that struck down the Red Wings. And Baron doesn't have a crystal. So why? I cannot say.
The elder sighed. Cain gently pushed his hand away, standing up and adjusting his helmet.
I need to see Baron for myself.
Porum leapt up.
Elder, I too will go to Baron.
Cain turned to her, shaking his head.
Don't. Cain. Don't make me repeat myself.
He spun on his heel and retreated to the entryway, starting to climb down the stairs of the tower. Porum rushed to him, ducking underneath his arm and blocking his path, panting for breath.
Where are you going? Baron is my homeland.
He calmly gripped her forearm, yanking her behind him and shoving her back through the threshold before disappearing down the stairs. Porum grimaced, rubbing her smarting skin as Megan and Anja approached, each saddling one of the elder's arms over their shoulders.
Porum. Go after him.
Anja looked down.
You're worried about Cain and Theodore, right? You can handle the Devil's Road better than any of us, you don't need Megan and I. But...
Porum glanced over at the elder, who looked up at her with a weak smile.
You don't need to worry about me, Porum. Just promise me you won't do anything rash.
Megan patted the elder's back.
Don't worry. I'll give the elder the best care there is. All right.
Porum nodded.
I'll figure out what's happening, and be back in a flash.
She raised her hand sadly, turning and fleeing down the stairs after Cain. When she emerged from the Tower of Prayer, another clap of thunder rolled overhead, and Porum flinched in surprise, tugging the hood of her cloak up over her head in anticipation of fresh rain. First, she had to find Cain. He most likely didn't know how the Devil's Road functioned, so he wouldn't have gotten too far without her. But as she clambered down the steps to the main street, she was shocked to see a lone figure standing amongst the destruction and death the monsters had left in their wake before Cain annihilated them. It was a young woman, who looked to be her age, with flowing turquoise hair that poured down her ivory shoulders and wide, unblinking amber eyes that fell upon Porum as soon as she stepped out of the shadows of the tower. Porum noted with distaste how the woman's bare feet were stepping in puddles mixed with rain and blood as she stepped forward, her gossamer gown flouncing behind her carelessly.
Who are you?
Porum blinked, and the woman smirked.
Even if I told you, you wouldn't comprehend it.
Porum felt her face flush, and she crossed her arms over her chest haughtily. It was time to call upon a little Palem-like attitude.
I've never seen you around here before, which can only mean one thing, you're the one who unsealed the Devil's Road, aren't you?
Surprisingly, she merely nodded.
Yes, to retrieve the crystal.
Porum's jaw dropped at the girl's raw honesty.
Retrieve? Yes. Hold it, you.
Porum whirled around only to see the elder storm past her, his black robes billowing menacingly as he tapped his staff to the ground with each determined step, his head raised to his full height as he stared the mysterious girl down with a glare that Porum thought he only reserved for her brother.
Elder.
The elder stopped a few feet away from the girl, thrusting his staff toward her.
Those who lust for power must never lay hands on the crystal. Never again.
She shook her head, pressing her fingers to her forehead as if she were already exasperated.
I don't need your permission.
She closed her eyes, pressing her hands together as a soft gold light began to surround her. A storm of lightning bolts rained from the sky, and appearing before Porum and the elder in a flash of light was none other than Ramu himself, the bearded idol and thunder god. Raising his ruby-topped staff, he started to twirl it in circles above him, drawing into it a maelstrom of crackling energy. The wind violently picked up, whipping Porum so fiercely that she had to shield her face with her arms to keep her eyes from watering.
Ramu!
She screamed over the howling winds.
Why are you doing this? Where's Rydia? No.
The elder gasped, raising his staff and chanting under his breath. As the atmosphere surrounding Ramu began to get darker and heavier with energy, Porum waded through the winds, her head lowered as she tried to make her way over to the elder. She had decided to become his shield. There would be no way a magic barrier could even stop an Eidolon's magic. She would just have to pray that she could sustain the hit for both of them. Porum. I know you can hear me. I need you to lend me your power. I can't protect the elder by myself. But the elder's eyes flashed as he turned to meet Porum, and it was only too late that she realized what he had done. A glittering white light bathed Porum's body, and she found that she could no longer move. It felt like her body was being ripped away from gravity's pull, no matter how firmly she dug her toes into the ground.
Elder!
Porum cried, struggling to reach out with her hand, despite it now feeling like it weighed 500 pounds.
No.
The teleport spell spirited her away in a burst of light, and Ramu released his storm, a cascade of lightning crashing upon the elder's form. Porum could only watch helplessly from the entrance of the village, where she had been transported just in time to see the elder's smoking form collapse to the ground, Ramu disappearing in a swirl of green crystals.
How meaningless,
the mysterious girl sighed. She stepped over the elder's fallen body as if it were a mess a dog had left in the street, and began to make her way toward the Tower of Prayer.
You!
Porum shrieked, running up the street as fast as her legs could carry her and preparing to launch herself onto the girl's narrow shoulders from behind. She heard a whistle dart past her ear, in a familiar, achingly cool voice.
Wait!
Both Porum and the girl turned to see Cain standing before them, one hand cocked on his hip and the other behind his back.
Cain!
Porum cried out in relief.
Thank God, you've... Is this what you're looking for?
Cain held up the hand behind his back, which contained the crystal of water, dull and lightless in his hands, but most definitely the one that was supposed to be in the crystal chamber of the Tower of Prayer. The mysterious girl's eyes widened, and Porum watched disgustedly as a small smile formed on her lips.
This is it, the real thing.
Cain shrugged.
It's yours.
The girl burst into startled laughter, and Porum stumbled forward, feeling as if someone had sucker-punched her right in her gut.
Wait! Cain!
He didn't even look at her as the girl giggled once more for good measure and shook her head.
A wise choice.
She began to approach Cain, but he lifted the crystal in the air away from her, shaking his head.
On one condition, though.
The girl paused mid-step, her hands on her hips.
What? I'll give it to you only after I finish what I set out to do. And what is that? An audience with the King of Baron.
Porum watched their conversation, dumbstruck. What the hell was going on? Was Cain trying to bait her, or... Gods forbid it, this was all for real? The mysterious girl smirked. So, the Dragoon had figured out her hold over Baron, which was more than could be said about the other fools she had had to deal with so far. This one was clever. And there was something else about him that far surpassed the other insects, even the half-breed.
For what purpose?
Cain clenched the crystal so tightly that Porum feared he would grind it to dust before her very eyes.
To take his life. I will kill Cecil with my own hands.
Porum gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth. No. He can't be serious. Why? But the girl appeared to have no reason to believe any of this was a joke. She nodded thoughtfully, not even giving Porum a passing glance as she turned on her heel.
Understood. Bring the crystal with you.
She opened a portal of swirling blue light and leapt inside, disappearing in the blink of an eye.
Cain!
Porum cried, finally managing to find her voice.
Please.
She made a grab for the crystal, but Cain was of course far too fast for her even when she wasn't in such a depleted state. He snatched her hand in his, sneering as his fingers clamped so tightly over hers that she could feel the blood cease to circulate to her digits.
You're hurting me.
Porum moaned, lifting her eyes to his.
Please, it's not too late to stop this. Cecil. He loves you. All this time, he's What would a child like you know about love?
Cain hissed, and with one swift motion, yanked Porum's pinky back so viciously that she heard the snap before her body could register what had happened. The blood drained from her face as the shock of the agonizing pain began to wash over her. She fell effortlessly as Cain tossed her away, turning on his heel and leaping to the roof of the pub in one graceful leap before jumping again, and again, until he was out of sight. Porum cringed as she held up her crippled hand, her finger now blossoming with dark purple and black clotted bruises. She could feel the vomit rising in her throat and knew she would get ill right there in the street if she stared at it any longer, so she proceeded to drag herself to the elder's side with her one good hand and her rubbery legs, hiccuping with the effort. Leaning over him, she bit her lip so hard that she could taste blood.
Elder.
He was splayed out on the ground face down, his hair matted in burned clumps from Rama's spell and his body still, patches of pink, puckered skin visible through the burns in his robes. Her chest heaved with sobs as she tried to process what had just occurred. Everything had happened so quickly, and she had been, well, powerless. Less than powerless, utterly worthless. It was true, after all. She really couldn't do anything without her brother. And he hadn't answered her plea. Holding her breath until she thought her heart might burst, there came no flutter of a second pulse, and warmth no longer emitted from the cold, tarnished ring twisted painfully around her rapidly swelling finger. He's gone. Palams. Porum clasped her hands together, ignoring the painful throb of her shattered bones, trying to think of a spell that could fix this, any of it, but she could feel her hysteria rapidly rising, drowning out any and all rational thought. Her brain had become a jumble of garbled spell incantations and radio static. She closed her eyes, collapsing over the elder and finally allowing herself to give in to despair as her tears showered his bloodied robes. She let erupt a scream that had been buried so deep inside of her, she hardly recognized the sound of her own terror.
Porum.
Silently, the storm clouds in the skies above parted, and the second moon shed its light. End of Part 1. End of chapter.